The gleaming vessels appeared without warning above Earth's blue atmosphere, blocking out sections of the sky like a swarm of silver locusts that had crossed the void between stars. Ambassador Giara stood in the center of the United Nations Galactic Affairs Assembly Chamber in Geneva, his forearms folded across his crystalline chestplate, while his vertical pupils scanned the gathered human leaders with barely concealed contempt. "Your species has been observed," Ziakara announced, his translator converting his harmonic speech into flat human words that echoed through the silent chamber. "You have achieved faster-than-light travel, which grants you the attention of the Sovereign Confluence, but not its respect." Secretary-General Maria Santos sat motionless at the head table, her jaw clenched tight enough to ache while she listened to the alien's pronouncement. "Humanity is young, violent, and dangerously unpredictable," the ambassador continued. "Your history broadcasts your nature. Endless wars, weapons of planetary destruction, conflicts over resources and ideology that have killed billions of your own kind." Outside the chamber windows, the alien fleet hung in orbit like a threat made manifest, while news drones captured every angle and broadcast the sight to 7 billion terrified humans below. The Sovereign Confluence has maintained galactic peace for 12,000 of your years, Jara said. "We do not permit species like yours to threaten that peace." "We haven't threatened anyone." President Chun of the Pan-Asian Coalition spoke up from his seat, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "We've only just reached beyond our own solar system." Jara's head tilted in what might have been amusement or disdain. "You misunderstand," the ambassador replied. "Your very existence is the threat." He activated a holographic display that filled the air above the assembly floor with images, human weapons, human wars, human atrocities spanning from ancient battlefields to modern orbital bombardments during the resource wars of 2089. You are what the Confluence terms a predator species, evolved from hunters, addicted to conflict, biologically driven to dominate and destroy. Maria Santos finally stood, her hands gripping the podium edge. "We've moved beyond our violent past," she said. "Humanity is unified now. We've built a world government, eliminated poverty, cured diseases. Noble efforts." Jara interrupted, "Irrelevant." The hologram shifted to show the Confluence fleet in all its overwhelming glory, thousands of vessels, spread across a dozen star systems, each one more advanced than anything humanity had yet constructed. "You will submit to Confluence authority," the ambassador declared. "You will surrender all military autonomy to our oversight. Accept Confluence governors to guide your political development, and restrict your expansion to your home system under our protection." The chamber erupted in shouting, while delegates from every nation jumped to their feet in protest, and outrageous Kara simply raised one hand and the hologram changed again, this time showing a planet barren, lifeless, its atmosphere stripped away to reveal nothing but scorched rock beneath. "The Vrelian Compact also refused our guidance," he said quietly. "They believed their primitive weapons and defiant spirit would be sufficient." The image needed no further explanation. "You have 72 of your hours to accept our terms." Jara continued, "Kneel, or face the consequences of your pride." Then he simply vanished, teleported back to his command ship, while humanity's leaders sat in stunned silence. The next 3 days became a blur of emergency sessions, public panic, and impossible decisions, while the Confluence fleet waited in orbit like an executioner's. Blade military commanders argued for resistance, while others claimed it would be suicide to fight such overwhelming force. Religious leaders preached both submission and defiance, while philosophers debated the moral implications of surrendering human sovereignty. The public response split along every conceivable line. Some demanded humanity bow to save itself, while others called for Death before dishonor in a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. Admiral Sarah Chun watched the debates on multiple screens while her staff prepared contingency plans that seemed increasingly futile. There, write about our history, her intelligence officer Commander Marcus Williams said. Quietly, we are violent. We've spent more of our existence at war than at peace. That's not weakness, Chun replied without taking her eyes from the screens. That's experience. She pulled up a classified file on her personal terminal, one that only a handful of people on Earth knew existed. Protocol Midnight Williams leaned closer to read the document, and his eyes widened. Is this real? He whispered. We actually built this? 30 years ago, right after we achieved FTL, Chun confirmed. Some people thought I was paranoid when I proposed it. Others called it the greatest waste of resources in human history. And now? Chun allowed herself a thin smile. Now we're going to find out if all those years in the dark were worth it. She entered her authorization codes and watched as the system processed her identity through biometric scans that verified everything from her retinal pattern to her genetic markers. The screen flashed green. Identity confirmed. Admiral Sarah Sainer. Fingers hovered over the final command key while she thought about the volunteers who had given up everything: family, friends, normal lives, to crew vessels that might never fire a shot. She thought about the engineers who had built those ships in secret stations beyond Neptune where no telescopes would find them. She thought about the tacticians who had studied every battle humanity had ever fought and distilled those lessons into doctrines for warfare beyond Earth. Most of all, she thought about what the Confluence clearly didn't understand, that humanity's history of violence wasn't a flaw to be ashamed of, but a warning to be heeded. Her finger came down on the key. Protile L. Midnight activated recall code transmitted. Black Armada, weapons HFY across the Kuiper Belt, in the Oort cloud, and scattered throughout the outer reaches of the Sol system. 2,000 stealth warships received the signal. They had been waiting 15 years to hear. Their crewsmen and women who had volunteered to spend years in cold silence between the stars began powering up weapon systems that had never been tested in actual combat. Admiral Chun stood straight in her uniform. Get me a secure channel to the Secretary General, she ordered. It's time to tell the Confluence our answer. Williams stared at her. What answer is that, Admiral? Chun's smile turned cold and hard. No, in orbit above Earth. The Confluence fleet continued its patient wait while counting down the hours. Until humanity's inevitable surrender, they had no idea what was coming for them. The Confluence intelligence analysts had been thorough in their assessment of humanity, or so they believed. They had monitored Earth's radio transmissions for decades before making contact, cataloged human weapons development, and analyzed thousands of hours of historical records that humans themselves had broadcast into space. What they saw confirmed every prejudice their species held about young, aggressive civilizations: warfare, genocide, planetary devastation, and an apparent inability to cooperate even within their own species. What they missed was everything that happened after humanity achieved faster-than-light travel in 29.5. The breakthrough came not from government laboratories, but from a small team of physicists working in New Zealand, who accidentally discovered how to fold space while trying to create a more efficient fusion reactor within weeks. Every major government had teams working to replicate and improve the technology within months. The first human vessel, a converted cargo hauler called Pioneer, made the jump to Alpha Centauri and back within a year. Humanity had dozens of ships exploring nearby star systems while construction began on humanity's first interstellar colony vessel. It should have been a golden age of exploration and expansion. Instead, it became humanity's most carefully guarded secret general. Richard Zhao stood before the newly formed United Earth Defense Council in a secure facility that officially didn't exist and presented a scenario that most people would have called paranoid. "We have to assume we're not alone," he said, while displaying star charts showing the dozens of potentially habitable worlds within 100 light years. "And we have to assume that whoever else is out there might not be friendly. That's quite an assumption." One council member objected. "We haven't detected any signs of intelligent life." "Exactly," Zhao replied, "which means either we're alone, which seems statistically impossible given the size of the universe, or anyone else out there is deliberately staying hidden, or they're so far away we simply haven't detected them yet." Another council member suggested. Zhao shook his head. "Our radio broadcasts have been traveling through space for over a century," he said. "If anyone is listening within 100 light years, they know we're here." He pulled up historical records from Earth's own colonial period, the encounters between technologically advanced civilizations and less developed ones that almost universally ended in conquest, exploitation, or genocide. Every time in human history when a more advanced culture met a less advanced one, the result was devastating for the weaker party. Zhao continued, "We can't assume aliens would treat us any better than European colonizers treated indigenous peoples." The room fell silent while the council members absorbed the implications. "What are you proposing?" The council chair asked. Zhao activated another display. This one showing ship designs unlike anything humanity had built before. Angular, dark, bristling with weapon systems that pushed the boundaries of known physics. "We build a fleet," he said. "Not for exploration, we'll do that with civilian vessels, but for defense against a threat that might never come. The cost would be astronomical." Someone protested. "The cost of being unprepared would be extinction." Zhao countered that conversation had taken place 30 years ago, in a world that still remembered the resource wars and understood that peace was something you fought for, not something that simply happened. The council had approved Zhao's proposal by a single vote. Construction began in secret, using automated facilities built in the Kuiper Belt were Earth-based. Telescopes couldn't observe them. The ships were designated the Black Armada, black because they were coated in materials that absorbed electromagnetic radiation across the entire spectrum, making them nearly invisible to conventional sensors. The design philosophy was simple. Assume the enemy has better technology in every area except one: the willingness to do whatever it takes to survive. Human engineers couldn't match theoretical alien energy shields, so they built kinetic weapons that didn't need to. Railguns that accelerated projectiles to relativistic speeds using fusion-powered magnetic acceleration. They couldn't compete with advanced sensors, so they built ships designed for ambush and hit-and-run tactics that military historians would have recognized from guerrilla warfare throughout human history. They couldn't build faster engines, so they built ships that could coast silently through space for years at a time, waiting in the dark like submarines beneath an ocean of stars. Most importantly, they built ships crewed by volunteers who understood what they were signing up for: years of isolation, minimal contact with home, training for a war that might never happen. Admiral Sarah Chun had been a lieutenant when she first volunteered for the Black Armada in 2110. She remembered the interview with General Zhao himself, who had looked at her service record and asked one simple question: "Why?" "Because someone has to be ready," she had answered, "and I'd rather spend my life preparing for a threat that never comes than die knowing we could have been prepared but weren't." Zhao had smiled and approved her application now. 15 years later, she commanded the entire fleet. From her flagship, Defiant, a vessel the size of a small city that had never been closer to Neptune's orbiter, crew numbered 3,000 souls who had given up everything normal humans took for granted: families, careers, sunlight, fresh air, the simple pleasure of walking on solid ground. They trained constantly, running simulations of battles against enemies they could only imagine while studying every naval engagement, every air combat, every ground battle in human history for lessons they could apply to space warfare. They became experts in asymmetric warfare, the art of fighting enemies who were stronger, more numerous, and better equipped. They learned patience, discipline, and the cold calculus of violence that had kept humanity alive through millions of years of evolution. When Protocol Midnight activated and Chun's command screens lit up with the recall order, she felt no satisfaction, only a grim determination to prove that all those years hadn't been wasted. All ships, this is Defiant Actual. She broadcast across the encrypted network that linked the Black Armada. Execute Phase 1. Silent approach. Maintain stealth protocols. Target packages will be distributed once we achieve optimal positioning. Across the outer solar system, 2,000 warships began accelerating toward Earth on trajectories calculated to keep them in the sensor shadow of asteroids, debris fields, and the solar wind itself. The Confluence fleet in Earth orbit continued its countdown to humanity's surrender. Confident in their overwhelming technological superiority, their sensors showed nothing unusual in the vast emptiness beyond Earth's moon. Their intelligence continued to report that humanity possessed no significant military space capability beyond a few orbital defense platforms that could be eliminated in minutes. Their commanders relaxed in their quarters, discussing how quickly humanity would capitulate once they understood the futility of resistance. One of them suspected that humanity had spent 3 decades preparing for exactly this moment. Not one of them understood that human paranoia, the same trait that had driven humanity to build weapons of planetary destruction just in case they needed them, was about to become their worst nightmare. Admiral Chun sat in her command chair aboard Defiant and watched her fleet approach Earth like ghosts gliding through the dark. In 48 hours, the Confluence would receive humanity's answer, but by then, it would already be too late. The 71st hour arrived with Secretary General Maria Santos standing before the assembled representatives of humanity while the Confluence fleet waited in orbit above every news feed across Earth. Broadcast her face as she prepared to deliver humanity's response to the ultimatum that had held the planet hostage for 3 days. Ambassador Shaka Kara appeared via hologram in the assembly chamber. His forearms crossed while his crystalline features reflected the lights in patterns that suggested supreme confidence. "Your time has expired," he announced. "What is humanity's answer?" Santos took a breath and spoke a single word that would echo through history. "Nos Dejaris." Expression shifted through several emotions that human observers couldn't quite interpret: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. "A regrettable choice." The ambassador replied, "You condemn your species to..." The hologram flickered and died in orbit. The Confluence flagship Radiant Judgment experienced its first anomaly when 3 escort vessels simply vanished from sensors. Report. Fleet Commander Zalthar demanded from his command throne. "Unknown." "Commander?" His sensor operator replied while frantically checking her instruments. They were there, and then they weren't. No debris, no energy signatures, nothing. Mechanical. "Failure?" Zalthar suggested. "All 3 at once?" Before anyone could answer, the flagship's communication array exploded in a shower of metal fragments while alarms began shrieking throughout the vessel. The Black Armada had arrived. Admiral Chun watched the tactical displays aboard Defiant while her fleet executed the opening moves of a battle plan that had been refined through countless simulations. Target packages confirmed. Commander Williams reported. All strike groups report optimal positioning. Execute Phase 2, Chun ordered. "I want them blind and confused before they understand what's happening." The Black Armada's first wave consisted not of direct attacks, but of electronic warfare that had been specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in Confluence technology. Human hackers, the best that decades of cyber warfare had produced unleashed. Viruses and worms that infiltrated Confluence networks through their own communication beams simultaneously. Kinetic kill vehicles no larger than coffins accelerated toward high-value targets at speeds that made them nearly impossible to intercept. The Confluence had designed their shields to disperse energy weapons, lasers, particle beams, plasma bolts, using principles of physics that humanity hadn't yet fully understood. What their shields couldn't handle was simple mass traveling at relativistic velocity. The first kinetic impactor struck a confluence destroyer amidships at 3% the speed of light. The shield tried to disperse the kinetic energy, but the mathematics were unforgiving. 1,000 kilograms traveling at 9 million meters per second carried more energy than most nuclear weapons. The destroyer simply ceased to exist, replaced by an expanding cloud of vaporized metal and organic matter. 11 more confluence vessels died in the first 30 seconds, while their commanders tried to understand what was attacking them. Sensors detect no enemy vessels. A confluence tactical officer reported to Zalthar, but we're being hit by high-velocity projectiles, originating from everywhere. Impossible. Zalthar snapped. Run full spectrum scans. The scans revealed nothing but empty space and the usual background radiation of the solar system. What they couldn't detect was the black Armada ships coasting silently through the void with their stealth systems, engaged electromagnetic absorbing hulls. Minimal heat signatures, no active sensors that could give away their positions. The Confluence relied on active sensor sweeps and energy signatures to track enemy vessels. Humanity had built ships that were designed to be ghosts. All ships, weapons-free. Chun commanded. Target their command vessels, first cut off their coordination. The Black Armada opened fire with railguns. They accelerated solid projectiles using magnetic fields, powered by fusion reactors that had been running cold until this moment. The projectiles themselves were simple tungsten penetrators designed to punch through armor using nothing but kinetic energy, no exotic physics, no advanced technology, just mass and velocity applied with precision. A confluence heavy cruiser took 3 hits in quick succession while its captain tried to locate the enemy. The first penetrator punched through the forward hull and exited the stern, venting atmosphere and killing hundreds. Second struck the engineering section and triggered a cascade failure in the ship's power core. The third hit the command deck and killed everyone there instantly. Evasive maneuvers, Zalthar ordered while watching his fleet being systematically dismantled by an enemy he couldn't see. All vessels. Emergency jump to rally point Beta. His navigations officer looked up with terror in her large eyes. Commander, something is jamming our faster-than-light drives. We can't make the jump. Chun smiled coldly as her electronic warfare teams reported success. The Confluence relied on quantum entanglement communicators for FTL coordination, sophisticated technology that humanity didn't fully understand, but had learned to disrupt through brute force. Electromagnetic interference. They're not going anywhere, she said. Continue the attack. I want every command ship crippled within the hour. But the Confluence weren't helpless. Zalthar was a veteran of 3 major conflicts, and he understood that panic would kill his fleet faster than any weapon. All vessels formed defensive sphere formation Delta. He ordered overlapping fields of fire, maximum shield strength on outer vessels. The Confluence fleet began organizing itself into a formation that had served them well in previous wars, a sphere that allowed mutual support and eliminated blind spots. It would have worked against any conventional enemy. It didn't account for an enemy that had studied human submarine warfare. They're clustering together. Williams observed, exactly like the simulations predicted. Good, Chun replied. Activate the Trojan packages. During the initial electronic warfare phase, human hackers had uploaded malicious code into Confluence, targeting computers through a captured communication beam. Their code had lain dormant, Waiting for the right moment now, it activated across the Confluence fleet. Weapons systems began identifying friendly vessels as hostile targets, while firing solutions appeared on targeting computers for ships that were supposed to be allies. Some Confluence vessels opened fire on each other before their crews realized what was happening. Others hesitated, trying to determine which targets were real and which were computer errors. That hesitation cost them precious seconds, while the Black Armada pressed its attack. A Confluence battlecruiser accidentally shot down 3 of its own escort frigates before its weapons officer managed to override the corrupted targeting system. By then, a spread of kinetic penetrators had already reduced the battlecruiser to drifting wreckage. "This isn't warfare," Zalthar whispered while watching his fleet die around him. "This is butchery." His tactical officer spoke quietly. "Commander, they're not fighting like any species we've encountered before. They're using tactics that seem designed specifically to counter our standard formations and technology." "How is that possible?" Zalthar demanded. "We've never fought them before." What he didn't understand was that humanity had been fighting itself for thousands of years and had developed warfare into a science that covered every possible scenario. Every battle the Confluence had ever fought had been recorded and studied by human analysts who looked for patterns and weaknesses. Every technology the Confluence possessed had been evaluated and countered by engineers who approached problems with the assumption that they would face enemies with superior equipment. Most importantly, humanity had learned through bitter experience that survival didn't go to the strongest or the fastest. It went to those willing to be more ruthless, more creative, and more desperate than their enemies. Chun watched the battle unfold exactly as her tactical teams had predicted and allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Then she opened a channel to the Confluence flagship on every frequency she could manage. "Attention Confluence forces," she broadcast. "I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You are being engaged by the Black Armada." She paused to let that sink in. "You came to our home and demanded we kneel." She continued. "You threatened us with extinction if we refused to submit." Another pause while more Confluence vessels died in silent explosions that lit up the dark. "Now you understand why humanity doesn't kneel," Chum said. "Leave our system now, or we will continue this lesson until there's nothing left of your fleet but debris." Zalthar stared at his screens while trying to process the impossible situation he found himself in. The primitive species, the violent, barely civilized humans, had somehow built a fleet that was destroying his forces with contemptuous ease. How? He whispered. Then he understood humanity hadn't been primitive at all. They had been preparing for this exact scenario since the moment they achieved interstellar flight. They had assumed the worst about the universe and built their defenses accordingly, and now the Confluence was paying the price for that assumption. Fleet Commander Zalthar was not a fool, and he had survived 3 major conflicts by knowing when to adapt his tactics. The initial shock of the Black Armada's attack had cost him nearly 40 vessels, but his fleet still numbered over 300 ships, more than enough to overwhelm the humans if he could just locate them. Cease defensive formation. He ordered all vessels execute dispersal pattern Omega, spread out across the maximum engagement envelope, and prepare for saturation bombardment of the planetary surface. His surviving commanders understood immediately if they couldn't fight the invisible human fleet effectively, they would simply eliminate the target. The humans were trying to protect Earth itself. Admiral Chun watched the Confluence fleet begin spreading out and felt her stomach tighten. "They're moving to bombardment positions," Williams reported. "If they achieve optimal spacing, they can target every major city on Earth simultaneously." "How long?" Chun asked. 18 minutes until they're in position." Chun pulled up her tactical overlays and ran quick calculations. The Black Armada could destroy perhaps 50 more Confluence vessels in 18 minutes. Not nearly enough to stop a coordinated planetary bombardment. Options? She demanded from her tactical team. We can concentrate our entire fleet on high-value targets. One officer suggested, try to kill enough command ships to disrupt their coordination. They'll adapt, Chun replied. They're already learning to compensate for our jamming. Another officer spoke up hesitantly. Admiral, we could use protocol. Prometheus. The command deck fell silent. Protocol Prometheus was the Black Armada's final contingency nuclear pump plasma, missiles that could devastate entire fleets but would make stealth impossible afterward. It would turn the battle into a straight slugging match where the numerically superior Confluence would have the advantage. Chen was about to give the order when her communication officer interrupted. Admiral, I'm receiving thousands of new contacts appearing throughout the inner system. They're broadcasting civilian transponders. Chun pulled up the sensor feed and couldn't suppress a smile. Every commercial hauler, mining vessel, orbital tug, and private spacecraft in the Sol system was accelerating toward the Confluence fleet while broadcasting a simple message on all frequencies. For Earth, the civilians were joining the fight. Captain Rebecca Martinez commanded the cargo hauler, Persistence, a vessel designed to move ore from the asteroid belt to Earth's orbital refineries. She had a crew of 12. No weapons, and armor plating that wouldn't stop a determined rifle shot. What she did have was momentum and mass. Engineering, what's our maximum velocity? She asked while plotting an intercept course with a Confluence destroyer. Captain, we're a cargo hauler, not a warship, her engineer protested. If you're planning what I think you're planning, answer the question. Martinez interrupted. Assuming we use the emergency override on the fusion drive and don't care about structural integrity, we could hit maybe 15,000 meters per second before the frame starts tearing itself apart. Martinez did the math in her head. Persistence. Mass 200,000 tons when empty at 15,000 meters per second. That would deliver roughly the same kinetic energy as a small nuclear weapon. That'll do, she said while entering the coordinates. All hands, get to the escape pods. We've got 10 minutes before impact. Captain, what are you doing? Her first officer asked. Martinez looked at her crew people she had worked with for 5 years. Hauling rocks through the cold dark of space, giving those alien bastards a lesson in human stubbornness, she replied. Now get off my ship. That's an order. Similar scenes played out across the inner solar system as civilian captains made the same calculation and came to the same conclusion. They couldn't win a fight against advanced warships, but they could become weapons. Themsavissel Thar watched in growing disbelief as his sensors registered hundreds of civilian vessels on collision courses with his fleet. They're ramming us, his tactical officer said in a tone of pure shock. The civilians are ramming us. Intercept them, Zalthar ordered. Target their propulsion systems. Disable them before they can. A mining barge the size of a small mountain struck a Confluence frigate at maximum velocity. The frigate's shields flared and failed while the impact crushed both vessels into expanding clouds of debris across the battlefield. Civilian ships executed suicide runs against Confluence vessels while broadcasting messages that ranged from defiant war cries to simple goodbyes to loved ones. Not all of them succeeded. Confluence Point Defense destroyed many before they could reach their targets, but there were so many of them Admiral Chun felt tears on her cheeks while watching the civilian fleet sacrifice themselves. Get me an open channel to all civilian vessels, she ordered when the connection opened. She spoke with a voice that shook with emotion. All civilian ships. This is Admiral Chun. You've done enough. More than enough. Break off your attacks and return to safe distance. Captain Martinez heard the order 5 minutes before Persistence would impact its targeter. Crew was already away in the escape pods, and she sat alone on her bridge with nothing but the stars visible through the forward viewport. Negative. Admiral, she replied. We didn't ask for this fight, but we're not going to let you face it alone. Humanity doesn't kneel, and we don't abandon our defenders." She cut the channel before Chun could respond. 4 minutes later, Persistence struck. Confluence battlecruiser midships at maximum velocity, and both vessels vanished in a brief flash of light that could be seen from Earth's surface. Exultar realized he was losing not just the battle, but any chance of maintaining Confluence credibility. New orders. He announced, "All vessels, prepare for immediate retreat to the outer system. We'll regroup." And his communication officer interrupted. "Commander, 3 of our member species are broadcasting withdrawal notices. They're pulling their fleets out of the engagement." "What?" Zolthar demanded. "On whose authority?" "Their own governments." The officer replied while pulling up the messages. "They're stating that the human resistance demonstrates sufficient military capability to warrant recognition of sovereignty, and that continued aggression violates Confluence Charter principles regarding warfare against sapient species. In other words, the Confluence Coalition was fracturing. The species that had joined the expedition, expecting an easy subjugation of primitives, were now watching those primitives fight with a ferocity that terrified them. Zolthar understood politics well enough to know what would happen next if he continued the battle and lost. The Confluence would blame him personally if he continued and won by destroying Earth. The member species would condemn the action as genocide, and the political fallout would tear the Confluence apart if he retreated. He would be remembered as the commander who failed to subjugate a primitive species. All 3 options ended his career, but only one might save his fleet. "Signal all vessels," he said quietly. "Immediate withdrawal to rally point Gamma. Execute emergency jump as soon as FTL systems are operational. The humans are still jamming our jump drives." His navigation officer reported. Zolthar closed his eyes and did something no Confluence commander had done in 12,000 years. He requested a ceasefire. Human Admiral Chun. He broadcast on the emergency diplomatic frequency. "I propose an immediate cessation of hostilities while we discuss terms." Chun received the message and looked at Williams. "He's asking for terms," she said in disbelief. "They came here to make U.S. kneel, and now they're asking for terms. What are you going to offer?" Williams asked. Chun thought about the civilians who had died ramming Confluence vessels. She thought about the Black Armada crews who had spent 15 years preparing for this battle. She thought about every human who had ever fought against impossible odds and won through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. "Tell Commander Zolthar that we'll accept his ceasefire on one condition," she said. "They leave our system immediately and don't come back." "And if they refuse?" Chun's expression hardened. "Then we show them what humanity does when someone threatens our home." She opened a channel to the entire Black Armada. "All ships, hold fire, but maintain targeting solutions if they try anything. I want them eliminated before they can blink." Across the battlefield, human weapons stayed trained on Confluence vessels, while both sides waited to see if the killing was truly over in Geneva. Secretary General Santos received the news that the Confluence was requesting terms and allowed herself to believe, for the first time in 3 days, that Earth might actually survive. The battle wasn't won yet, but humanity had proven something important when forced to choose between kneeling and fighting. Humanity would choose to fight every single time, and anyone who doubted that had just learned a very expensive lesson. The Confluence fleet departed Sol System 3 days after the ceasefire, while human vessels maintained careful watch until the last alien ship vanished into faster-than-light travel. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of Defiant and watched Earth grow larger in the viewport, a blue and white jewel that she hadn't seen with her own eyes in 15 years. "How does it feel?" Commander Williams asked from beside her, "Coming home as a hero?" Chun didn't answer immediately because the word hero felt wrong. She thought about the civilian captains who had rammed their ships. into enemy vessels. She thought about the Black Armada crews, who had trained for 15 years in isolation. She thought about Captain Rebecca Martinez and the hundreds of others who had died, proving that humanity wouldn't kneel. "I don't feel like a hero," she finally said. "I feel like someone who was prepared when preparation mattered." Williams nodded understanding while they watched Earth continue to grow. The diplomatic aftermath of the battle unfolded across the galaxy, with implications that would reshape interstellar politics for generations. The Sovereign Confluence issued what amounted to a formal apology, carefully worded to avoid admitting wrongdoing, but acknowledging that humanity possessed sufficient military capability to warrant recognition as a sovereign species. Ambassador Z. Okara was recalled in disgrace while his government tried to salvage what credibility they could from the disaster. 3 member species withdrew from the confluence entirely, citing philosophical differences about the use of force against developing civilizations. In the United Nations Assembly, Secretary General Maria Santos addressed not just humanity, but the galaxy itself through communication channels that the confluence had been forced to provide. "We did not seek this conflict," she announced while standing before the same podium where Chara had delivered his ultimatum. "We would have preferred peaceful first contact and cooperation with our galactic neighbors." She paused to let that sink in. "But we will not submit to threats," Santos continued. "We will not surrender our sovereignty to any power, no matter how advanced or numerous." Her voice grew harder. "Humanity has spent its entire existence fighting for survival, against predators, against disease, against each other, against hostile environments on our own planet, and we have always endured." The camera focused on her face. "Any species that wishes to share the galaxy with us in peace will find humanity to be loyal friends and valuable allies," she said. "Any species that attempts to subjugate us will learn the same lesson the confluence just learned." She finished with words that would be quoted in history books for centuries. "We are humanity. We don't kneel." Within weeks, other alien species began making contact with Earth. Some came out of genuine curiosity about the species that had defeated the confluence. Others came out of fear, wanting to establish diplomatic relations before any misunderstandings could lead to conflict. The Vrin Collective, a loose alliance of merchant species, offered extensive trade agreements in exchange for human protection against confluence retaliation. The Pinst, Catherine hierarchy, a warrior culture that valued strength above all. El sent ambassadors requesting military exchanges and mutual defense treaties. Even species humanity had never heard of emerged from quiet corners of the galaxy to introduce themselves to the neighbors, who had proven themselves anything but primitive. But not everyone saw humanity as a potential ally. Admiral Chun sat in a classified briefing 3 months after the battle, while intelligence analysts presented information that the confluence had tried to suppress. "We've intercepted communications suggesting that several species view humanity as a threat," the intelligence director explained. "Not because of our aggression, but because of our capability." "Elaborate," Chun requested. The director pulled up intercepted messages between military commands of species that humanity had never encountered. "They're calling us the Terran problem," he said. "A species that went from achieving faster-than-light travel to defeating a confluence fleet in just 30 years. That bothers them?" Williams asked. "It terrifies them," the director replied. "Most species take centuries to develop comparable military capability. We did it in a generation." Chun understood the implication. Humanity's rapid military advancement suggested a capacity for violence and innovation that other species found deeply unsettling. The question was what to do about it. General Richard Zhao, now retired but still consulted on major strategic decisions, provided his perspective in a private meeting with Chun and the civilian leadership. "The Black Armada was built to deter aggression," he said. "That purpose hasn't changed just because we won one battle. You think we need to maintain it?" Santos asked. even though the immediate threat has passed? Zhao looked at her with eyes that had seen too much warfare, especially because the threat is past. He replied, "The confluence tested us and lost. That will make some species respect us, but it will make others fear us. And fear leads to more conflict." Chun finished. "Eventually," Zhao confirmed, "which means we need to be ready." The decision was made to not only maintain the Black Armada, but to expand it. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers, young people inspired by the battle, veterans who wanted to continue serving, even former civilians who had participated in the ramming attacks and survived the shipyards in the Kuiper Belt went into full production, while new facilities were constructed throughout the Sol system within a year. The Black Armada numbered 5,000 vessels within 5 years. It would reach 10,000, but numbers weren't enough. Humanity also began establishing listening posts and early warning stations throughout nearby star systems, while diplomatic corps worked to build alliances and gather intelligence. The United Earth Defense Fleet became not just a military force, but a symbol of humanity's determination to control its own destiny. Admiral Chun found herself promoted to Supreme Commander of all human military forces, a position that came with responsibilities that sometimes kept her awake at night. One such night, she stood on the observation deck of the new command station orbiting Mars and watched construction crews work on the latest generation of warships. Williams joined her, as he often did during these late hours. "Do you ever wonder if we made things worse?" he asked quietly. "If maybe we should have tried harder to find a peaceful solution?" Chun considered the question carefully. The confluence didn't come here to negotiate. She finally said, "They came to dictate terms, submit or die, and there was no third option. Maybe if we had—" "No," Chun interrupted. "I've studied enough history to know that appeasement doesn't work with empires that view diplomacy as something you do with equals and force as something you use with inferiors." She gestured at the warships taking shape in the construction yards. "The confluence saw us as inferiors." She continued, "They would have subjugated us, governed us, controlled our development, and eventually, we would have become just another client species in their empire. Instead, we became something that scares them." Williams observed. "Yes," Chun agreed, "and I can live with that." She pulled up a communication from her personal files, one that Captain Martinez had sent to her family just before ramming Persistence into a Confluence battlecruiser. The message was simple: "I'm doing this so you never have to stay strong. Stay free, and remember that freedom is worth fighting for." Martinez and everyone else who died in that battle didn't sacrifice themselves, so we could submit to the next empire that comes along, Chun said. They died proving that humanity can't be intimidated into surrender. Williams nodded slowly. "So we keep building ships," he said. "We keep building ships," Chun confirmed. "And we hope we never have to use them, but we make damn sure we're ready if we do." 10 years after the battle, humanity had established itself as a recognized power in galactic politics. The Black Armada patrolled the borders of human space, while merchant vessels carried trade goods to dozens of alien worlds. Diplomatic missions worked to build lasting alliances, while intelligence services watched for threats. And on Earth, children grew up learning about the day the confluence came to make humanity kneel, and received a lesson in human stubbornness instead. In classrooms across the planet, teachers told the story of the Black Armada and the civilians who had fought beside them. They taught that peace was precious, but that some things were worth fighting for. They taught that freedom couldn't be given. It could only be taken and defended. They taught that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or numbers, but the simple refusal to quit when threatened. And on a moonless night above Earth, Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of Defiant and watched new Black Armada vessels join the fleet. Each ship was painted the same dark color that absorbed light and made them nearly invisible against the stars. Junior officer asked her why. They kept the ships black, even though stealth wasn't as important now that everyone knew about the fleet. Chan smiled and gave the same answer she had given a dozen times before. We paint them black so everyone remembers what happened when the confluence demanded we kneel, she said. We paint them black so anyone who thinks humanity can be threatened understands the cost of that mistake. And if they don't remember? Chun's smile turned cold. Then we remind them